Okay, my name is Taylor Cunningham, and I'm doing a public speaking project on child abuse, its linkage to serial killers, and how to prevent it. Um, my audience with me right now is my best friend and my mom. So that's who my audience is for tonight. So why is child abuse important to be recognized? Well, for one, it's wrong because it's the consistency of its cause and effect. So, and then also causes a trauma within the child's life, and down the line when a child begins to grow out of this trauma, it becomes very difficult for the child to progress, or the adult, or the individual to progress in their lifestyle. Today, it still follows a continuous cycle, and it causes severe physical, emotional, and mental effects. Um, there was a cycle that was developed and studied by the Domestic Abuse Organization, and it has the same cause and effect regardless of how the abuse has occurred. The abuse cycle, for one, step one is the incident occurs. So that's when the abuse or something had happened, either mentally, emotionally, physically, or in somewhat that's affecting the victim. The tension, step two is tension begins to build up. So there's just a limited amount of communication between the victim and the abuser. Basically, the victim feels sorry or sympathizes with the abuser, and begins to feel like the problem. They become very fearful. This has like long-term effects of disbelief, doubt, low self-esteem, and confidence as they grow up. Then there's step three, which is the makeup. Basically, the abuser apologizes, blames the victim, where the abuser plays a victim, or just basically it's like the turnaround or turntable of how the victim feels at their end. This is where the victim feels like they lose self-trust within themselves, they lose trust with others, and they develop an antisocial behavior from this event. On step four, there's a calm. Basically, it's after the event, whatever had happened, the abuser denies whatever had occurred, that the abuser just stops physically abusing or does not touch the victim, but still continues to hurt the victim. Promises are made, things are made up just to make the victim feel better. And then as these steps continue on, the cycle continues, and it's where it kind of messes up the victim dysfunctionally, mentally. There's plenty of statistics of how the abuse occurs. Basically, nearly almost 750,000 are being affected annually. The Child Protective Services have reported more than over 3.4 million cases almost per year, and they've only protected only 3 million children. About 4 out of 5 abusers are the victim's parents. So where this child abuse occurs, it's usually the parent or a family member or relative that's the abuser. The Child Protective Services investigated cases in 2015, and they found out that 90% of the abuser were somehow related to the victim. 90%. The statistics in child abuse, and this is where there's a lineage. Now, I'm not saying every person that has gone through child abuse is going to turn out to a serial killer. That's not where the statistics lie. But where the demographics has played in the background of a serial killer, they've had emotional, mental, physical, sexual abuse somewhere in their background. There was this research in University of Glasgow where out of 106 serial killers, from this prison, 55% of the killers had some kind of trauma that related to child abuse. There was this other study where the Radford University Professor Mitchell and Ahmed, they published an article saying that out of 50, 30% were physically abused, 20% were sexually abused, and 50% were psychologically abused. And that could come in different forms of how the victim is treated psychologically. It could be somehow verbal. It could be somehow, mistreated in a way where it's dysfunctional. And basically, it falls within the steps of that abuse cycle. The definition of child abuse defined by federal law, and this is not by any other state. This is defined by federal. It's any recent or act or where a parent or caretaker or somehow it could be anyone outside the family do serious physical, emotional harm, sexual abuse. Now, the second definition is an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. Now, this is where abuse comes in many forms. There's sexual, there's physical, there's psychological or emotional, verbal, physical neglect, emotional neglect, and medical neglect. From the National Children's Alliance research, neglect was one of the most common forms of maltreatment, and about 3/4 suffered neglect. Out of this research of children, 17.2% suffered physical abuse, and 8.4% suffered sexual abuse. There's plenty and different causes of child abuse. The most common one is that there's either the family is in poverty or have any related economic disadvantages. Could be employment. And the other common one is usually parent has a history of abuse. It could be domestic or it could be the family abuse. And what happened to the parent was that they denied, or they covered up, and they now just recently took it on their child. The effects of child abuse, of course, there's the physical injury that causes a scar. It could scar the child traumatically, psychologically. There's attempts of running away because of what situation that they feel trapped. There's sudden change in self-confidence, low self-esteem. They fail in school. They pretty much drop out of school because they feel worthless. They can develop some kind of anger issues because of how they're treated at home. They'll take it out on other people. They could, or which is most common in child abuse after effects is suicide. And what I'm trying to do is just trying to basically point out the cause and effect of how this has become so severe. And this all falls under the databases of the American Psychiatric Association, Administration for Children and Families, the Child Protective Services, Department of Health and Human Services, and there's a bunch of just health organizations that have watched and overseen what's going on. How it links to serial killers? There's plenty of serial killers out there that have a bad history of child abuse. Now, I'm not saying, like I said again, I'm not saying it's what child abuse is what leads to being a serial killer, because obviously it becomes a choice in this matter of stages of where this person lies in life. But it just like anger issues, when they bottle up so bad, they take it out on somebody else. The most famous one that's a serial killer that has a history of child abuse is John Wayne Gacy. And he's pretty famous for having, murdered 33 teenage boys and buried around his house. John Wayne Gacy, his dad was an alcoholic. and he basically abused his whole family because, you know, he physically, it had happened during the time of Depression. His dad was his family was in on the economy during the time of Depression. He had a war history. I think he was a war veteran or something, and basically his dad just took a toll on how Gacy grew up because of what was going on. And then others say that he was molested when he was just at a young age, and that could have been the possible effects as to why he felt a certain way against people. There's Eileen Wuornos. If I might mispronounce her name, she is the most famous female serial killer. She had a very rough childhood. You know, she was abandoned by her mother. She was, you know, raped and beaten by her grandfather and one of his friends. And she was pregnant at 14. And, you know, she just used prostitution as part of her reeling into getting her murder victims. Then there's a whole list of, I think there's about 10, 12 of these famous serial killers to have these biographies of information of how child abuse has affected them. And they come forward after the effect, but it's just too late because of how mentally and physically they're gone. Now, the definition of now let's not get too confused. But the definition of a serial killer is that they have made multiple murders. It can range from 2 to 10 victims. Now, this is under the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigations. Sometimes they come in categories. They could be a single murder, they could be double murder, or triple murder. And these murders happen within a period of time. Now, there's occasions where they're separate, or, you know, from time to time, or it could be a cooling off period. Basically, they can murder somebody, then they can wait a whole year not being discovered, and then that next year they murder somebody. And then there's the emotional cooling off period, where how they're somehow personally involved, and they kind of just let it go emotionally, and then they murder someone again. Now, with terrorists, they are basically a person who's a member of a group who advocates, you know, terrorism, and their political aims. They're trying to politically gain something out of their tactic of fear. You know, terrorism is the use of violence to intimidate or cause harm for political purposes. They're just trying to somehow either, you know, govern a state or resist a government. How to prevent and recognize child abuse. Basically, what I'm talking about right now is that we're trying to recognize it. I'm trying to give you information about the early symptoms and behaviors of how the child abuse is going through. This is recommended from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they recommend CPS immediately after if you're a victim or if you witness something. There's therapy. I know it's a kind of beat the dead horse thing, but, you know, there is therapists out there that are willing to listen and willing to help those who have suffered greatly from child abuse. Pediatricians are obligated to report these suspected cases. There's medical treatment, you know, having to deal with this trauma. There's a family counselor who provides different resources. Now, that's not resources as to, like, you know, just therapy. There's also resources how, you know, a parent could find employment through a full-time job, or live through poverty, or they can provide courses or something to progress, not to just immediately, like, say, oh, you need to go to therapy to talk about your feelings. No, a family counselor is there to provide different resources. There's support groups. And then the number one thing is, when you're dealing with child abuse, is to move forward and somehow cope with the emotions. Now, this is all recommended under the American Academy. This is not my saying. This is just me providing the information from that. But I've added a little bit of information. What we can early prevent child abuse is that we can expose the information to youth groups and learning centers as to why child abuse is important and what its potential effects could happen after the causes. I suggest that we make it mandatory for high schools to have students required to take adult life courses, like such as finances, planning, preparing to make career life choices, juvenile care, and more. So as far as what I've covered, I'm basically as far to what I covered, I'm basically just trying to get the information out there, and I want people to know about this information, and I want it to be a source to prevent child abuse, because I feel it's important. I feel it's not really recognized as much as people think it is. Even today, when people say, "Oh no, we put people in jail because of CPS," no, a lot of children out there are denying, or they're scared because they're afraid to come forward about these problems because of what they're going through. All I have to say is that I hope this information was helpful, and that I hope to see you guys in the next speech.